Hey guys, this is probably my last presentation to the emergency department about continuous quality improvement. I've picked as my last major project examination tables. So we have a problem, and that problem is that oftentimes there are doctors waiting to see patients, while there are patients waiting to see doctors, but because of a lack of examination space, we're unable to meet the two, to make the two join. The goal of what I'm proposing here is to reduce PIA times by giving doctors sufficient space in which to work. And Lee Toner has come up with the rough and ready number that for every doctor and every learner, there should be 1.5 rooms available to us. And this makes sense from, if you go to your family doctor's office, they have one patient waiting for them in the next room while they're in one examination room with the current patient. It just helps flow. So I'm going to present some evidence that this actually is a problem. I'm going to present subjective evidence, subjective opinions, and then some data on patients waiting and placed. So the subjective evidence, you can ask any MD in our department and ask him or her if she's ever had to wait for a room to become available. I think the answer will be yes, and I think that's a big problem. The nurses recognize it too. This is a text message that I received from a nurse prior to coming on to a night shift, giving me a little bit of warning. This problem has a real effect on the morale of our department. I think we ignore this loss of morale at our peril. So I did some analysis to come up with some objective evidence in support of this subjective evidence. I selected 5 days at random from the last 2 months of data that I had, November and December 2015. Then I calculated how many patients were waiting and how many patients were placed on a minute-by-minute basis. And I'll present those graphs in the following slides. So the first day was November the 9th, and as you can see, for most of the day there were 5 to 10 patients placed, which is decent. A couple of times, however, this dropped down to 0. At a critical point, when the 2 p.m. doctor started, there were no patients placed. The start of the shift is when we pick up the most patients per hour, so this would have been a big problem for that doctor. And perhaps not surprisingly, corresponding to that time, you can see that the number of patients waiting shoots up. November the 21st wasn't a bad day. You can see that for most of the day we had 5 to 10 patients placed. The only criticism I'd have here is that the placement during the day was late in coming and compared to the number waiting to be seen. Whereas the placement of patients closely follows the number of patients waiting during the nighttime hours. So obviously we're a bit more efficient getting patients placed during the nighttime than we are in the early morning hours, which is when we know that wave really starts. December the 1st was a pretty bad day. You can see that for most of the day there were less than 5 patients placed. December the 7th was much worse. You might even call it catastrophic. For much of the day, including the busiest part of the day, there were 0 to 4 patients placed. Obviously, this is going to have a very big effect on our efficiency. December the 17th was a pretty good day again. Again, the only criticism is that we didn't get patients placed in rooms until well after the wave starts arriving. This is in keeping with the data that I've already presented during another talk, that it takes, on average, about an hour for patients to be placed from the time they arrive. So one solution that I've mentioned before is examination tables. And I'm going to present the rationale once again here so that it's clear. The rationale is that we're very accommodating. And there's a culture of accepting inpatients in the ED, both in ourselves, I think, and as well in our consultant colleagues, that it's okay for a patient to wait in the ED. But in being accommodating of some of these patients, we're hurting others. For every patient we put in a bed, there are more in the waiting room who are prevented from even seeing a doctor because of flow issues. And because they can't see a doctor, they don't get analgesics or anti-nausea medications, let alone the privilege of lying down. They're sitting in a waiting room. So we need to ensure an efficient use of space in order to prevent this from happening. And moving stretchers out and examination tables in is one way to do this. The last part of the rationale is that we've tried a lot of other things, LIN meetings, the fire marshal, etc., and those might work, but they're slow in coming. So what can we do in the meantime ourselves in order to fix this problem? So I'm going to present some evidence of the solution. In the same way, there's going to be subjective and objective evidence. So the subjective evidence first starts off a few years ago when Dr. Marco Duich, who's now chief of Southlake ED, then chief of St. Joseph's in Toronto, came to speak to our group and suggested that we move stretchers out and examination tables in. And this is one of the major reasons that he attributes to his success in making the #1 and #2 emergency departments in Ontario. And you can say, you could criticize this. You could say that we have a different type of department, which is fair, and a different patient population, which is probably also true. But I'd argue that the similarities between what we do and what they do down south far outweigh the differences, and that we should at least consider his advice. The majority of docs in our group agree, and in the survey that I conducted, 14 out of 18 respondents voted in favor of implementing examination tables. Apart from democracy, we also have science on our side in data from our own department. So these are data from the Obs Pilot, where we ensured that rooms 16 and 17 were open for examination rooms. The pilot started in late June 2015 and is ostensibly still running. But since that time, I think there's been a lot of backsliding, and I'd argue that more often than not, these 2 rooms are used for inpatients now. But initially, it did open some space. And comparing our PIA to the previous year and other variables, you can see that our volumes and inpatient levels roughly stayed the same. Our PIA times, however, were substantially better, an average of 52 minutes better. And this is significant. Gary's done some analysis that has shown that if we drop some of our times by as little as 30 minutes, this would increase our P4R funding by $250,000. So 52 minutes is quite significant. I think the moral of the story here is that when you give docs adequate space to work, they can perform better. So a short presentation, but here's the summary. I've presented some subjective and objective evidence for the problem, subjective and objective evidence for the solution, and just a reminder that our goal is to give docs sufficient examination space to work in order to improve PIA. Some external solutions to resolve the inpatient problem, for example, the LIN, the board, the fire marshal, have been tried and are slow in coming. This is not an avenue that's going to bring solutions tomorrow. Examination tables, on the other hand, are an internal solution that we can implement ourselves and quickly. So my recommendation from all of this is that we talk to the management and get this done, because I think this is an easy solution that has evidence backing it that we can implement quickly to help ourselves, help our patients. Thanks very much.